Welcome to Leading for Wellness. I'm Liesl Bernard, CEO of Colon Executive Search. Each week, we'll dive into the journeys of visionary wellness entrepreneurs, uncovering their secrets to success. Get ready for insightful conversation that will inspire you to elevate your business and prioritize your well-being. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Leading for Wellness. Really excited today about our guest, Sam Schatz, who is the CEO of Biohme Technologies, a company pioneering microbiome-based ingredients using proprietary datasets that integrate genetic analysis, metadata, and AI. With more than 15 years of experience in management and entrepreneurship, Sam holds a master's from London School of Economics and a BA at Columbia University and serves on the leadership councils of 92NY and YPO Polaris. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. It looks like you're working from your apartment in New York today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, no, it's my pleasure. And I got your email earlier about getting a microphone, and apparently they only sell enormous microphones. So I have one, and I now need a separate room for my microphone in my apartment. So it's enormous, but thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you.
You sound great. Your quality of your sounds great.
That's great.
I would love to know what inspired you to join Biohme Technologies, and how does your background in biotechnology and sustainable entrepreneurship shape your vision for the company?
Yeah, so I've been fascinated by the intersection between data science and biology for a long time, sort of seeing the power of computing and how that's continued to develop. And now certainly with AI, we're able to really understand these biological systems much better than we ever have been in our history, and that's only rapidly accelerating. So my previous work with AeroFarms, where I was the first employee, was looking at a biological system, a farm, and scaling it using data, and went through many iterations of that over almost a decade, and they're now operating, I think, the largest one in the world out of Virginia. I saw this opportunity with Biohme Technologies a few years back and was just so impressed by the scientific rigor behind Biohme with Dr. Biohme in his lab in Cleveland, and the tremendous data set that they had amassed over the last 5-6 years, and just saw like a huge opportunity to develop and understand what's happening in the complex biological system, which is our microbiome. And we've been just razor focused on developing that platform further, and investing in more research and science, and looking at the ability to create new ingredients, biotic-based ingredients. So it's really exciting, and it's always for me been about doing something with purpose and with a mission and helping people. And so previously for me, it was creating healthy food using a fraction of the inputs, and growing food sustainably without any pesticides. And this is obviously very different, but the probiotics and biotic-based ingredients that we innovate and sell, are helping many people, and that makes me grateful for being in a role like this.
Yeah, very impressive background, and love your mission. I think a lot of people hear the word microbiome. What is the human microbiome, and why is it so important for our health?
So I think, our understanding of the microbiome is evolving. I think, to put it short, there are trillions of organisms living on and inside of our body. There's actually more microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, viruses than there are human cells in the body. And if you were to kind of put them all together, they would weigh about as much as like a human organ and be about the size of one.
Wow.
But obviously this is spread throughout our body. And these organisms were around billions of years before humans ever existed, right? So to think that, we're somehow better than them, we really evolved with them. And specifically our immune system evolved to manage them. And some people are viewing the immune system as really like a park ranger for the microbiome. But basically, these are ecosystems in the body, and they're different microbiota in different parts of the body. When we think about the microbiome, most people think about the gut microbiome, which is certainly the largest. But there's microbiomes in the oral cavity. There's microbiomes in your armpits. Pretty much any place in your body has a microbiome, and they're just basically different environments where different types of organisms can kind of thrive based on the environment. So no different than different ecosystems on the planet, right? They have, some are hot and humid and some are dry, and different types of things can survive and proliferate in those. So the microbiome that we've been mainly focused on, whereas most people are focused on, is on the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome is really a combination of both the small intestine and the large intestine. Most of the research has been in the large intestine, but the small intestine is getting increasingly more research, and there are different types of organisms that exist in each of those ecosystems. They are a little bit different, even from each other, when we think about the gut. But the short of it is you have bacteria, viruses, which can be called phages, but there's different types of viruses that live in the gut, and then actually fungi, which are probably the least understood, which is a big area of focus of our company, is understanding the role that fungi play in the gut microbiome. These are all competing for resources in the body, in the gut, and they produce things like short chain fatty acids and enzymes that can interact with the food that you're eating. It can impact anything from mood to cognition to digestion, digestive health. If there's an imbalance, it could lead to things like gas and bloating. If there's a serious imbalance over a period of time, it could lead to something called leaky gut, which can cause a whole bunch of other issues like chronic inflammation, immune-related issues, issues between the gut-brain axis. So, there's really a tremendous amount of potential mechanisms of action that are occurring in the gut, and that's an area of very active research. And we're just fortunate to be, one of many companies that are focused on that. But we are uniquely looking at a lot of these what we call polymicrobial interactions, which are really the relationships between bacteria and fungi in the gut, and that's where a lot of our foundational research has come from.
So, Sam, Biohme is known for leveraging both bacterial and fungal microbiome data, unlike
Yeah.
many competitors who focus solely on bacteria. Why is this dual approach important for gut health, and what advantages does it offer in product development, including fungi?
One example, we're very focused on the relationships between bacteria and fungi, and so one example that we look at quite a bit is the relationship between Candida and other bacterial organisms in the gut. And what we found is that Candida actually produces nutrients to support the growth of some lactobacillus species that are beneficial organisms in the gut, widely considered beneficial. Those same beneficial organisms actually produce lactic acid that control the growth and limit the growth of Candida. So they're operating in a sort of a synergistic relationship to promote balance. However, when there's an imbalance, some of the research that we've done and we've shown in our preclinical work and even in our clinical work is that Candida, if there's an overabundance of Candida, it can actually basically form biofilms with other bacteria like E. coli and Asparagines and a few others, and that those biofilms can actually be almost 10 times thicker than just bacterial biofilms. So what's happening is in the gut, if you have an imbalance that leads to higher levels of Candida, that could result in the formation of these biofilms, which actually have been shown to form these phyla that can actually pierce through the gut lining and cause a whole number of issues. And so understanding, how to modulate the microbiome to reduce levels of Candida and get it back to a healthier balance, but also specifically looking how can you reduce those biofilms has been an area of focus for us over the last really over the last 4 clinical trials that we've done, and where we've shown really the ability to break down these biofilms, to reduce candida, to modulate the microbiome, and kind of improve and get it back to a healthier state. And so in that research and then through all of our testing over the last decade almost, we've sequenced tens of thousands of microbiomes through our testing platform. We've actually found a number of other different types of yeast and fungi in the gut, and we have very strong hypotheses around like what these are doing, and then we're looking within cohorts within our data to understand what ecosystems these thrive in, these types of organisms thrive in, and trying to understand what they're doing, and how they're interacting with all these other organisms. And so we've done a lot of research there. We're really excited to be focused on launching some new ingredients, the fungal-based biotic ingredients, and that's a real focus for our future research, is really unlocking that sort of less understood part of the story with the microbiome.
That's fascinating. I feel like there's so many people that, the microbiome topic is overwhelming to begin with because there's, so much information. And I think a lot of people feel or have thought that candida is bad, period, right? So you don't want any candida in your gut. And what you're saying is that you need to have the right balance of candida. And that's actually a necessary bacteria or fungi in your system. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say there's a healthy level of candida in the gut, and when we do testing, we're testing for whether or not you're within that range, whether you're in that healthy range. But certainly, it's something that it can be pathogenic and needs to be kept in check, and that's why we actively test for that specific species, that taxa. But there's many others that that we're screening for, and we're looking at what that balance is. And when folks are interested and curious to know like which probiotics they should take, or what their microbiome is looking like, I would say whether it's ours or someone else's test, I mean, taking a test is going to give you a lot of that information. That's going to be super helpful in pointing you in the right direction.
So you guys have developed quite an advanced test in order to understand, the state of your microbiome. What kind of information would you get out of the test that you can get from your company or other tests for someone that's never taken a microbiome test?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, we use all the methods that we use are sort of peer-reviewed methods. So we use 16S and ITS sequencing for the bacteria and fungi, and what we've shown is that we get very good resolution on the ecology within our sample set. So we know which species are present with a very high degree of accuracy and at what levels. And that in our research has been most predictive of understanding, okay, what is driving, particular dysbiosis within a specific cohort that we're looking at. So when somebody takes our tests, either through through one of our partners, they'll get the levels of several dozen different organisms that are known in the literature to have an impact on different conditions, their levels, and then they'll get diet, lifestyle, and then actually specific supplement recommendations that are tied to the results, so that if you want to modulate your microbiome back to a healthier state, and you have an overabundance of candida, then you'll want to take something to reduce candida, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes ratio is off balance, then you'll be given a special recommendation, whether it's diet plus supplement,
So
to
a very
help you.
personalized plan.
Yeah, it's definitely personalized to the results, and
Mhm.
that's where we found the demand is and what people are looking for. And I agree, it is like there's so much information, and there's a lot of nonsense out there, and there's a lot of people saying that probiotics can solve everything. I don't think they can solve everything, but they're certainly foundational to our health. But it's not something um, to take lightly. I think testing is an important part of understanding what's happening, and having a program to kind of improve it. So
How quickly can someone improve their microbiome? If you're taking a test now, is it 90 days, 6 months, 12 months? Sort of what is the recommended to test and then retest when you take certain products and want to affect
yeah,
your.
we typically, I mean, if there's for folks that are really focused where they have an issue, we typically tell them to test every 3 months until it gets to a healthier state, or their symptoms kind of, like if they have gas or bloating or other sort of digestive issues, until those have sort of gone away. Our the clinical trials that we've done have typically been over a 30-day period, and we've shown modulation of the microbiome with our own ingredients over that period, with daily supplementation. Um, so I think some results, certainly after a month, but you know, sticking with it for a few months probably makes the most sense. And then the other thing is, like, if you are going to test, probably don't test if you're on antibiotics, or, if you had food poisoning or something. Try to do it when it's sort of like your steady state, because the microbiome is always changing. It's not like you're getting a DNA test and you do it once. It is always changing. So you should probably go, um, whatever your steady state is, even if it's an unhealthy steady state, that's how you're living your life, and that's all the more reason to take it. Um, but we've been getting more into we've been looking at the relationship between the microbiome and longevity, and so we've actually been doing a lot of testing with people who, don't have any gastrointestinal issues, or at least nothing that they know of, and they've been testing their microbiomes. And what we've done previously is we've done like a gut score, right? So this is sort of like what your score is today. It's kind of like a moment in time. Like, this is what the data is showing us. What we did is we built an AI platform to sit on top of our data set. It's a deep learning uh, platform. And we built it over the past year and a half. And what we saw was a very strong relationship between healthy aging and the microbiome. And so we identified about 110 taxa that were most associated with healthy aging, and the microbiome. And we've created a new report based on that. And we highlight about a dozen of those organisms in the report, and we give a score that kind of shows, from a longevity standpoint, like how you're performing. And that's sort of like, if your gut score is where you are today, that longevity score is sort of like where you're going, where you'll be if you can continue to do
That's
the things that you're
fascinating.
doing. And so we launched that actually, back in January, with we were actually invited to be at the Brian Johnson's Summit
Okay.
series. And so we've been talking to a lot of his followers and his customers, and um, been doing a lot of testing for people who are living very healthy lives and are actually don't have any gut issues, but they're interested to know that connection between microbiome and longevity. So that's been another fascinating area for us to look into, is that connection.
And is that part of the test, the longevity? Is that part of the test that you guys are doing, or is that a separate test?
It's the same test. It's just a
Hmm.
different report,
Got
from
it.
the same test. Yeah,
Okay,
exactly. So we have the ability to test for both at the same time.
great.
Hmm.
Can you explain how Biohme's Symbiont AI discovery platform works and how it accelerates the identification of novel ingredients for microbiome health products?
Yes, I can. So, uh, so our first ingredient, which is called Mycosa, um, was developed using data. We There were a number. We were looking at biofilms, in people who had very significant issues with these biofilms, like clinical data. And we ran two different types of bioinformatic analysis. One was a differential abundance analysis to see which species were most prevalent and at what levels. And the other was a correlation analysis to see which species were positively correlated with each other within that specific cohort, positively or negatively, right? So every cohort is different. A cohort is like an ecosystem, right? It's like in these types of people, with these types of ecosystems, these are how these relationships work. So you might find, two organisms that are very highly correlated with each other, which means, typically when you have one, you have the other, and around roughly the same levels. If they're negatively correlated, that essentially means, they could be antagonistic with each other. Maybe they eat the same food. Maybe they eat each other. Maybe we don't even know why.
Wow,
But
that's
the
fascinating.
data is showing is that there's some antagonistic relationship between those organisms. When you have one, you don't have the other, and vice versa. So we did that analysis, and we found the organisms that were associated with the biofilm, and then we found the specific species that were associated with or antagonistic to the organisms that we were trying to get rid of, essentially break down. And so that analysis, we then we published all of this in gastroenterology, and then we launched our ingredient, and we've then successfully validated that in multiple clinicals. That whole process is what we call Symbiont, right? Symbiont is
Okay.
the data, taking our data and discovering new ingredients or new formulas, new formulations around a specific hypothesis. The next generation of that platform is taking a lot of those statistical tools and kind of leveling them up with some of the more recent advancements in AI, right? So, a correlation analysis or a differential abundance analysis is great, but there's more advanced statistical tools, and then there are different types of models that can run like thousands of iterations much more quickly and really find the organisms that are the most associated with a particular state with a greater degree of accuracy. So that tool has been built, and that is what we're using right now to basically help us understand what all these different cohorts are. And when I say cohort, it could be uh, stressed out men over 50, who sleep less than 6 hours a night and are taking NSAIDs, right? That could be a cohort within our data set. Or it could be, healthy, active women, 18 to 35, who are, eating a high, high carb diet. I don't know. There's so many. There's like countless numbers of different cohorts, almost over 10,000 when we last counted.
Wow.
So so now what we're doing is we're looking at those cohorts. We have these like hypotheses, and then we're using our Symbiont platform to understand which organisms are driving whatever hypothesis, and then we quickly translate what we're seeing in the data and then validating it in the lab. And so what that process does for Biohme Technologies is it accelerates our ability to innovate, because without the data and also without the AI, you're kind of you're kind of hoping to get lucky with a specific species or a specific strain. We focus on a species, and then if we see really, really strong things in the data, then we'll look at the strains in the lab to kind of optimize around it.
That's fascinating. So, what I'm getting from this is that ultimately there in the future there may be products for certain, you know, uh, places in your life, for people with high stress, for men, for women. So very personalized microbiome products that would be coming out in the future. Is that the vision for all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's multifold, but yeah, I think that's where this is going. Is really having a platform where we can do that type of innovation.
What are some of the most innovative products that you have formulated? Mycosa is one that comes to mind. Do you want to share a bit about how Mycosa works and how that came about?
Yeah, exactly. So Mycosa was developed. It's the one that I mentioned where we use kind of the data to power it, but it's really the specific mechanism of action is like breaking down biofilms in the gut, these kind of polymicrobial ones, and it's really starting with Candida, like reducing overabundance of Candida, but then also targeting um, the organisms that might be driving that dysbiosis that are creating those polymicrobial interactions.
Candida seems to be a big problem for most people, and I think especially in the American diet, where there is so much sugar and processed foods. And, from my understanding and also my personal experience, those are the things that feed Candida. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And so I think what we're seeing is that in the American diet in particular, where there are a lot of refined sugars, we do see a lot of people with elevated levels of Candida, and a lot of um, some of the symptoms of having uh, having like inflammation in the gut can come from these biofilms. So like that is the underlying mechanism. And what happens with these biofilms is they're very difficult to break down. And so we actually experimented with a number of different enzymes as well. And the enzymes are also within the Mycosa formula to break down the biofilm in the gut. And then um, we have Saccharomyces boulardii, which we've shown to be antagonistic with Candida, helping reduce the Candida levels, and then basically repopulating the gut with healthy microbes like Acidophilus rhamnosus and Bifidobacteria breve.
That's fascinating. So, how are you guys working with supplement and food companies in order to incorporate mycosa so that the public can have access to this?
Yeah, so that's that's obviously like a big part of our focus now is like working and getting educating other brands, other companies, um, practitioner brands about this underlying mechanism, the clinical trials that we've done, and then hoping to get this targeted probiotic, which is really like a next generation probiotic. A lot of folks are just putting whatever they can find and trying to like get a high CFU count, and just whatever they can find, they just throw it in there. Really needs to be more targeted.
Mhm.
You don't just need CFU, you need to understand like a specific mechanism of action and actually create something targeted. And this is what Mycosa does. Is it is specifically targeted to that imbalance that we think is very prevalent, specifically in the United States, where we have a lot of like refined sugars in our diet. And so, we've seen it in the data. We've tested tens of thousands of microbiomes. We see, these species that are elevated, and then we've shown, longitudinally in our data, but also in our clinicals that we can modulate the microbiome and get it to a healthier state with this ingredient.
Great. That's really fascinating. And so, what format does it mainly come in? Is it in a supplement format, a powder? Does it in food? How can companies use mycosa in order to get that to the consumer?
Yeah, great question. So it's in a it generally people formulate in a capsule, but you can also put it. It's stable at room temperature. 18 months, we have stability, and so people put it in powders as well. You could. We actually had one clinical trial where we actually looked at supplementation with mycosa plus pea protein, and we actually saw increased absorption of pea protein, but also reduction in a lot of like the gastro kind of symptoms associated with eating pea protein. People get like a lot of bloating and gas and stuff like that. So we not only improved the outcomes for people who had, these types of issues eating pea protein, but actually the absorption of pea protein was increased. And the idea there is you break down the biofilm, you're able to absorb more nutrients. And we've shown that now in a clinical, but we also showed in vitro we were able to increase absorption of casein and vitamin C. And so there's a lot that we think that this can do from like a nutrient absorption standpoint. And so the idea there is you could put it in like a powder, like a pea protein powder that you're taking, and have that that as like an added benefit. So um,
That's really
you know,
exciting. I think that's just, there's so many people with candida issues and they probably don't even know it. And incorporating this into their diet will just, I think, will alleviate so many issues, for so many people, inflammation and absorption and, other gut issues. Um, you mentioned that there are microbiome and fungi all over our bodies in different places, and I feel like most of the research and products are still focused on gut only. Are you guys inventing or looking at developing products for other gut or microbiome populations on the body?
Yes, we are. I can't talk too much about them here, but we do have a few initiatives underway where we do want to expand, beyond the gut. And so that is underway. It's very exciting, but I can't talk too much about it yet.
Okay.
Maybe we can do this again in a year or something, and I can
Yeah,
talk about some of the new
absolutely.
products. But I'd love to. I would love to, but we're trying to evaluate some things internally before we do any kind of announcement. So, but there's so many. At Biohme Technologies, we think that the microbiome is at the center of human wellness, and when we say that, it's not just the gut; it's the whole body.
Yeah.
And if you're not formulating with the microbiome in mind, then you're missing a really big part of the story. And if you're not formulating thinking about the role of fungi in the gut, then you're also missing a part of the story. And so that's really what we try to, we talk to brands, companies that are looking to innovate in this space. That's really how we lead, because it's, there's a lot of noise out there. And, to really, hit the mark, you need to have strong data, strong clinicals, and, you know, uh, an understanding of like who it is that you're trying to develop a product for and what their needs are.
So, Sam, where do you see the biggest opportunities for microbiome science in the next 5 years? And how is Biome positioning itself to lead in this rapidly evolving field?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of areas. One area is definitely the development of postbiotics. So postbiotics are, really can be one of two things. They can either be um, short chain fatty acids that are produced by different types of organisms. So butyrate is one of those. Butyrate can have anti-inflammatory effects. It can also provide an energy source for colon cells, and it also is. I mean, there's many things, and it's being researched, but it can also cross the blood-brain barrier, and can potentially influence mood and well-being. And so there's a lot of work, a lot of focus on understanding the different ways in which butyrate operate in the body. But there's a lot of people are trying to find ways to deliver butyrate, without the organism, and so there are postbiotics that are around that. But one of the issues is it doesn't smell great and it's hard to kind of isolate. But there are definitely companies out there that are looking at those types of postbiotics. The other are actually what we call heat treated organisms, and they're basically dead bugs, dead organisms. But if you keep the cell walls of those organisms intact, they remember when we started this conversation, I was talking about like the immune system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the immune system still sees it as alive. It looks at the organism. It doesn't know if it's dead or alive, but it still operates in the same way. And so there's been some really interesting clinical science around looking at um, what happens in terms of modulation of the microbiome in the presence of these postbiotics. And the reason why it's exciting is one of the issues with probiotics is um, is their stability. It's very difficult to keep them alive and to keep them alive long enough to, be in the immune system and modulate the microbiome. If you're able to heat treat them, then it doesn't matter, if they're alive or dead. They're still going to, they're still going to have the intended impact on the immune system if the immune system recognizes it. And it seems like, at least in some of the clinicals, even though you're not supplementing with a live version of a cell, you're still increasing the growth of that cell, of that type of bug in the body by supplementing with the postbiotic. And I think folks are still trying to figure out exactly why that's the case, but it's an exciting area because you could modulate the microbiome without having, a live organism, which means, you could put it in more formats. You
Mm-hmm.
could bake it, you could put it in a beverage. It could be sort of like more widely available. So that's an exciting area. But I think fundamentally, for us, we see a lot of power in the role of fungi in gut health. And so that's another area where we're really leaning in to understand all these different interactions and really understand what are all these fungal organisms doing in the body, how are they interacting with our immune system, how are they interacting with other bacteria and viruses in the body, and trying to really formulate based on that. So
Fascinating.
yeah.
I know Biohme Technologies is more of a B2B, company. You have the microbiome test that you're white labeling. What else, what is the vision for expanding your product offerings, and where Biohme Technologies want to be in 5 years from now?
Yeah, no, I think we're we're looking to bring new ingredients to the market that are um, that don't exist currently in the supplement space, and those are going to be the building blocks for us for targeted formulations, where we're looking at these sort of polymicrobial relationships in different cohorts. So, a few years from now, I'd like us to have targeted, clinically studied formulations around, you know, dozens of cohorts, that we've seen in our data using, both bacterial and fungal ingredients um, that have been clinically shown to improve, the outcomes in those specific cohorts, um, and be marketing those and getting those out as widely as possible to consumers globally. I mean, that's the vision, and I think we're making meaningful steps to get there. But it's tough. I mean, it's we're talking about working with ingredients that haven't been used in the dietary supplement space, and trying to figure out stability and making sure the quality is where it needs to be, um, and then educating
Hmm.
educating people and telling the story, because it is, people when you say the microbiome and you say all these different bacteria, a lot of people, it's already a lot of information, and then you start adding in these whole other,
Fungi.
yeah, fungi and all these other things. People, it starts to be like information overload, and ultimately what people care about is what problem are you solving. And
Yeah.
that's where we really try to focus on the storytelling. Is like, people we looked at women over 40, for instance, and we found that, um, one of our cohorts, and we looked at women over 40, and we found that in one third of women, they had that slept less than 7 hours a night. We found that lack of sleep was predictive of a number of negative outcomes, like type 2 diabetes, hypertension.
Wow.
Um, and then, interestingly, in that same cohort, we found elevated levels of Candida. Um,
That makes a
so,
lot of sense, right?
yeah, so that's one example, right? Where, okay, so if I'm going to develop a formula for women over 40, if I didn't test, if I didn't know about Candida, I would have missed, a third of
Hmm.
women, right, in that cohort. But, more importantly, it's, can you develop something that is solving a problem for those women? And, modulation of the microbiome is great, but, so what? What is that actually doing for them? What problem is it solving? And I think, that's where additional clinical trials, that's where, doing that additional work is going to be, that's where it's going in the next few years. Like, how can the microbiome be the basis for a solution for different types of cohorts in our data?
That'll be so impactful for health, to have that specific formulations for people in different age brackets, different, sex, male, female. And I would imagine that the level of cortisol for people under high stress that don't sleep well, I wonder if there's a correlation between cortisol levels, and increased candida and, not great microbiome. That'll be an interesting sort of correlation, because it seems like if you don't get sleep, and you're in a high stress environment, it seems like that affects so many things, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, there was actually recent research today that shows that the gut brain axis is connected more meaningfully than we thought. That the gut can modulate the brain, but the brain can also modulate the gut. And I would imagine cortisol plays a role, but there's a lot of research happening to really understand, this second brain. They're connected in a very meaningful way, and the externalities in our lives are always going to be modulating our gut, and that's connected intimately with our body, our not only our immune system, but our brain. And so, what's more important than that? Understanding those connections. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so difficult to do without data. You're
Mm-hmm.
sort of operating in the dark unless you have a really strong data set. And that's really where, that's where we're leaning in, is trying to parse through all that data using the best methods that are out there to discover new ingredients and targeted formulas to help as many people as possible. So
Amazing, amazing what you guys are doing. How difficult is it to get people to be part of the research? Because obviously it's pretty invasive. People's got to take a poop sample, right, in order to have you guys test. So is it hard to get people to participate in these studies? How do you guys do that?
yeah, no, we use the term fecal
Fecal.
sample.
Sorry, I didn't use the right
No,
term there.
no, it's a poop sample. I mean, I think like at the end of the day, um, our test is very easy to do.
Hmm.
It
So most
really,
people are willing to do it. Yeah.
yeah, we haven't found it. There are some that are more difficult than others. Ours is, we don't need a lot of material, right? It's very easy to get it, and
Hmm.
it's a very clean process. Um, so we haven't had any issue on the recruitment side for the
Yeah.
clinicals. I mean, we generally work with contract research organizations or with academic institutions, and they do the research, they do
Hmm.
the recruitment. Um, but I think, if you talk to some of these CROs, I think recruitment in general is down. I think recruitment has gotten tougher. I think people
Hmm.
just have like, I don't know, everybody's got like a side gig or a side hustle, and maybe like doing clinical trials, people don't have enough time for it anymore. But, I think that is a separate conversation you could
Separate
have with a
conversation.
CRO. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah, absolutely. So, as a leader and an entrepreneur, how do you innovate a culture of innovation and wellness within your team? Are there, sort of things that you do to cultivate that as part of being a CEO by Biohme?
yeah, so, we're a remote company, and I had to decide early on because I kind of came in like right around COVID, a little bit after COVID, when things were
Hmm.
starting to settle down. And I think the company really became remote because of COVID. And so I had to sort of decide, do I want to like lean into remote, or do I want to, like, I live in New York, do I want to move to Cleveland and, build out the business there? And I decided that the remote work can be really a blessing in many ways. Obviously, people have their work life balance, they're able to manage their time better. But the most important thing is you're able to recruit the best people for the role. It just expands your ability to recruit. You can find the best people in the country for particular roles. And what that does is it means you ultimately have a lot of confidence and trust in those people, right? That they're going to do a great job. And if you have a lot of confidence and trust in people, I don't need to see them in an office every day. I just trust that they're going to be doing a great job. And that's the philosophy, that I've had. And I think that everything else kind of flows from that. Because if you have people that you trust, that you have a lot of respect for, you have mutual respect in an organization, which I think remote work allows for. It's not to say that in person doesn't allow for that, but it can be more difficult to recruit, especially when you're trying to build something quickly. Everything else follows. So people are able to balance their own time. People, we have a lot of very active people in the company doing marathons every other week, and, doing competitions and all kinds of stuff. And I think the work life balance that remote work allows people to have that flexibility to do what they need to do to have their own balance, right? You want microbiome
Hmm.
balance, so you want, balance in your life as well, right? So, yeah, I think, that to me is the core of it, is building relationships where you have a lot of trust and mutual respect, and you know,
Share a vision,
we
yeah.
share a vision.
Hmm.
And, we do a lot of we do like offsites, we get together. We were in, we had our leadership offsite in January. We went to Asheville where they got hit by the hurricane, and we volunteered there and to help out. And we
I
also
love
went
that.
on some like beautiful hikes and stuff. So, whatever I can do, I try to like optimize the time that we do have together in person. So
Quality versus quantity time,
it is, it
Yeah.
is,
Hmm.
everybody, we spend a lot of time with each other and we work very hard. Everybody works very hard. But at the end of the day, life is much more dynamic than what you're doing in the office. There's a lot more that it has to offer. And, remote work, I think, um, makes it possible for people to have the right balance. Um, so,
Hmm.
but it's not for everybody. It has to be the right person,
Yeah,
and I think
no, I
that's
totally
that's
agree.
part of the recruitment of finding the right people.
Finding the right talent, absolutely. Amazing. I love what you guys are doing. You're obviously making huge contributions to the world's health with all the data and research that you're doing. Very impressed. What are the three things that you do to improve your performance and longevity? What sort of biohacks and things do you do that improve your health and productivity?
Yeah. So, I feel like I have two little kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. So, I part of my challenge is just like not getting sick all the time, because there's every week they're bringing home something new. And so, one of the things that I found is I had to, like, for whatever reason, alcohol for me was just destroyed my sleep. And then
Hmm.
if I didn't sleep, then my immune system wasn't good, and then I would be
It
getting
affected
sick.
your microbiome.
It affected my microbiome, and it
Hmm.
was just so basically, I mean, I still have a drink every now and then, but I try to cut that out almost entirely. I think it's eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, diverse set of fruit, diverse diet. It's really diet and exercise. I mean, that's what everybody says. I also like the sauna. So the sauna for me,
Red
I
light.
think I have an infrared sauna. Yeah,
Hmm.
I think I'm the only person in my building that has one. I kind of snuck it up. People were like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "It's a dishwasher." Um, and people, I don't think it's allowed here, but I have it. But it helps too. But I think it's really those things. I love what folks like Brian Johnson are doing. For me, it's too extreme. Like, I'm more about balance, and I don't like to overdo anything. I think if you exercise daily, you eat a balanced diet, um, you take care of yourself, and you get sleep, that's gonna do a lot for your longevity and your overall health and well-being. So, and then I test my microbiome. I test it, every few months, and I do believe in, uh, making sure that I have a diverse microbiome, so that, I'm getting ahead of any of these issues long term. And so I take our probiotic supplement, not every day. I used to, but now I actually feel a lot better. So I take it, a couple times a week,
Amazing.
as well. So, yep.
Love it. So you're practicing what you preach. I have one last
Right.
question, and this may be a little bit out there, but we talk a lot about the gut-brain connection, and I'm curious if there's any consideration to the heart-gut connection. How emotions affect our microbiome and our the gut microbiome population on our bodies. Has that ever been explored?
Yeah, I mean, there is some work that's being done there. I frankly, I haven't looked at. We haven't been researching it ourselves. It's definitely a newer area. But one of the things that, um, one of the connections that I am aware of is like the connection between chronic inflammation and the heart. And chronic inflammation has been shown to negatively impact the heart, and heart function. And so leaky gut
Hmm.
actually can basically lead. to that type of chronic inflammation. And so that's sort of like the connection. One of the connections that I'm aware of between the gut and the heart is, the leaky gut and kind of minimizing that. And that's a way to kind of get at the chronic inflammation that can lead to issues with the heart. But, actually analyzing the microbiome on the heart or in the heart.
I'm talking more about emotions. Like, they've had, I think, some studies done where meditation and, regulating your emotions and so forth really, have an impact on the microbiome.
Oh yeah. So I mean that's where, these short chain fatty acids like butyrate come in, where they've been shown to, increase kind of calmness, and like reduce levels of
Stress and
stress
emotion
and things like that. Yeah,
and
cortisol
depression.
levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's definitely, that's definitely an area, of increased research. But there's definitely a very strong connection between our emotions and, our gut and what
Our
we're
health. Yeah.
eating, our health.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
sorry, I thought, well, you said heart, I thought you meant like because there actually is a connection, but that people are looking at between the actual physical heart and the gut
Interesting.
as well,
I
which
didn't know
is
that.
an area of growing research. But that's definitely on the newer side.
How can people learn more about Biohme Technologies? And if they wanted to reach out to you directly, Sam, what is the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, so definitely go to biohmetechnologies.com. We have a ton of information about our ingredients, our testing platform, and then if you want to reach out to me, it's sam@biohmetech.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. If you have any specific questions about our products or ingredients, I'm happy to have a conversation there.
Fantastic. Sam, thank you so much for our conversation today. Fascinating. I learned a ton. Very impressed with what you guys are doing, and thank you for changing the world one gut at a time.
Thank you. I appreciate the thoughtful questions, and it was great chatting with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning into Leading for Wellness. This podcast is powered by Kalon Executive Search. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And to learn more about our services, you can visit us at kalonstaffing.com or follow us on Instagram at kalonstaffing.